Good evening. Welcome back to London and to Euro 96, the second last of the rest days, another one tomorrow and then the final on Sunday. And tomorrow at 7 we'll be back with a full half hour previewing the final of Euro 96. In the meantime, tonight we continue our series on the history of the European Championships, winding it up with the era between 1988 and 1992. We called for the Dutch Masters and a fairy tale for Denmark.
During the 1982 World Cup finals in Spain, Trevor Francis was a member of an English team which performed well enough to secure a hard-earned quarter-final position. Now a television commentator and journalist, Francis won 52 international caps for his country, spent 5 happy years playing in Italy's Serie A, scored the winning goal in a European Cup final, and enjoyed a successful career as an English Premier League team manager. Despite England's proud football history and credible record in all the World Cup finals in which the team had participated since the mid-60s, winners in 1966, quarter-finalists in 1970, 1982 and 1986, when eliminated only by the genius of Diego Maradona, and 4 years later, a semi-final place against West Germany, England have tended to underachieve at European Championship level.
In the 86 World Cup, Diego Maradona virtually did it single-handed for Argentina. And then we come to 1988, when Marco van Basten was absolutely superb for Holland. And I think that he was one of the main reasons, along with Gullit and Rijkaard, why Holland was successful. And I think in England's case, in 1988, they were surprisingly beaten by Ireland. I don't think anyone expected that, despite the fact that Ireland under Jack Charlton were doing quite well at the time. And then, of course, we lost to Holland's side, who were the best side in Europe at that time, and they went on to prove that by winning in the final against Russia. And by the time that we faced Russia, we were so deflated, we knew that we were on our way back to England, that the game was of little significance. I think that, okay, it was a very disappointing time for us, but we did lose, to sides who are very, very good sides.
In the 1988 European Championship, 8 teams had progressed from 32 entrants. Germany, a side that included such dominant names as Klinsmann, Matthäus and Hassler, was the host nation, and although favourite to win the tournament, got off to a wretched start. Holland were there with 4 key men in place, Ruud Gullit, Frank Rijkaard, Marco van Basten and coach Rinus Michels, who had been drafted back into the Dutch fold after a long spell of acrimonious absence.
Het in 87, eind 87, begin...
The reason for this is a typically Dutch story. For an outsider, hardly understandable, but okay. At the end of 1978, I handed in my notice. I wanted to leave my position as technical director of the national team.
Wilde ik dus weg. En
This had to do with the fact that at my employers, the Board of Professional Football, there was a man who would rather see us lose than win. This may sound strange, but it is true. I won't go into details now about why, but this was the case.
Rijkaard was played in defence.
Rijkaard was een ideale middenvelder.
Rijkaard was an ideal midfield player. If I had had an alternative in the defence, with two men covering, as we call it, we like to play with two men covering and a free man, then I most certainly would not have taken Rijkaard out of the midfield. But I was short of a second covering man of ability who would also have a capacity in the air. That is why I asked Rijkaard, in the interest of the team, if he was prepared to play in that role. Looking at our way of playing, he didn't have to limit himself to just covering, as long as this was compensated for by someone else. Then he could also participate in building up an attack. Moreover, it fitted in with our way of playing. That was the fact of it. He accepted this. Everybody had a lot to say about the decision. But the way Rijkaard is, if he says I'll do it, then he will do it. But at the same time, he is a Dutchman. Let's not forget that. He is the kind of guy who will tell you if he doesn't want to do something. If he does it, then he will do it well. That's the way Rijkaard was. So it was not just a matter of being better as a midfield player. He could do both.
Maar hij is zo'n jongen. Als hij het niet wil, dan zegt hij het ook. En als hij het doet, dan doet hij het goed. Nou, en dat was dus Rijkaard.
Except for a World Cup winners' medal, Frank Rijkaard won every international honour and every club honour in all the national leagues in which he played.
Nou, ik was zeker blij omdat ik
Indeed, I was happy about this because I went to the European Championship in 1988 after I'd been non-active for a long time. I had left Ajax in the middle of the season and had not played football for 6 to 7 months. So I was happy that I could join the selection to go to Germany. Then it was a case of getting a place. This place appeared to be a position in the defence, and I was extremely happy that I could simply join the Dutch team in the European Championship after quite a disappointing season.
Having lost their opening fixture against the USSR, the Dutch were then pitted against the English.
Dat was voor ons alles of niet.
That was make or break for us.
In mijn ogen goed spelen tegen Rusland, verloren we nogal ongelukkig met een soort van counter en uitbraak. Ik ook van dat meen ik. En toen was de wedstrijd tegen Engeland al voor ons erop of voor ons.
I think we were lucky because England played a very good game and they could have won and deserved to win. But luck was on our side as a team. And there were good individual performances, such as Marco van Basten, who scored 3 times and who was in top physical condition.
Van Basten's startling control, grace and uncanny accuracy brought the Dutch relief, their first goal of the finals. However, in typical fashion, the English stirred themselves and came up with a strike full of courage and willful determination, 1 goal each. After the interval, Michels was on his feet when Van Basten added his second, and the Dutch could afford to feel just a little more confident. A hat-trick for Van Basten, the only true difference between the two teams on the day, and Holland had gained valuable points. The English would lose to the USSR, who headed the group, while the Dutch were left to face a stern challenge from Ireland for the right to progress into the semi-finals.
The
Irish were so difficult to play against because they applied a tremendous pressure football technique. Pressure on the ball, the football space, and on an opponent.
Op de bal, in de ruimte en op de tegenstander.
They had demonstrated this in their two previous matches. The pressure was the reason for their success. The strange thing was, because they only needed to draw with us, they didn't dare do it the way they had previously. And in fact, this became their downfall. They gave us more opportunities to play football, and consequently, we were a little better than the Irish were.
The Irish defended their lines like a fighter refusing to yield canvas. They, after all, only needed a draw to go forward into a fantasy semi-final against the host favourites West Germany. Then Michels played the most astute substitution of his career.
Keith was dus als pinchitter, hij wist dat ook, hij wist dus dat hij alleen maar erin kwam.
Keith was a substitute. He knew he would only have a chance of playing if the match wasn't going as it should for us.
Dat hij dus de laatste half uur man was.
He was the last half-hour man if we needed him. I told him at the time, I hope you don't have to come on. And they'd been called upon to play lots of times. So it was logical to bring him on because the game remained at 0-0. And we had to score. He was the substitute, and he came on to score an incredible goal. Luck only comes to you if you try everything you can. That includes having the courage to take a chance. Sometimes luck is on your side, although you cannot rely on it. And you cannot complain if it doesn't work out. I still believe that we deserved it more than the Irish because they played a too withheld game, and let us attack too much. There is always the danger that something like this will happen. And it happened.
Semi-final. West Germany against Holland.
Andere wedstrijd dan normaal. Bovendien, het is een halve finale in een eindtoernooi.
Tensions are high anyway in the semi-final, the last match before the final.
Het was een revanche.
It was seen as our retaliation match for the final in 1974.
Opgebouwd, nogmaals.
This notion was created by outsiders, especially the media.
Door de media. Daar zat nogal een brok koude oorlog omheen.
There was quite a war element involved, which the Germans were especially good at.
Sterk in zijn.
Whether a German, a Dutchman or an outsider, West Germany versus Holland in the European Championship semi-final was a big game indeed. There was no question about that. Nobody wanted to make a mistake in a match of this magnitude. Managers and goalkeepers remained alert, relieving their nervous energies and keeping their concentration the way men of football do. Defenders cleared their lines at all costs, petrified that they might be responsible for a damaging error, or even worse, being caught in possession, the mortal sin of defending. So it was of little surprise that, after 45 minutes of high anxiety, the game should remain goalless. In the second half, the forwards began to emerge into the pattern of the game, particularly Jürgen Klinsmann, who was never a man to duck a penalty area opportunity. The referee agreed with Klinsmann. The Dutch did not.
When a player is running towards you in the penalty area, you are not considering whether his name is Jürgen Klinsmann or if he has a different name. So it was not the case that I expected something in particular from Jürgen Klinsmann. I didn't consider whether he was going to fall over or not. But I must say at the time, in my view, it was not a real offence. But later, when I saw it on television, I thought it seemed like a penalty. Klinsmann simply handled it in a very clever and scheming way. He saw my leg move forwards and, of course, he let himself fall over it big time. And I think that is professional. He did it very well. Looking back at it on television, I thought, yes, it is a penalty. Finish.
With the Germans determined to hold on to their game and the disenchanted Dutch resolved to draw level, old enmities began to resurface.
Oh ja, er is een hele bijzondere rivaliteit tussen
Oh yes,
Nederlanders en
there is a
Duitsers.
very special rivalry between the Dutch and the Germans. However, I personally think this applies more to the Dutch. In general, in sport, the Dutch are fanatically against the Germans. This also applied to our team. There were a couple of players in our team who were really fanatical about beating Germany. I personally don't have this. I see Germany just as any other competitor. I mean, I respect German and English competitors. For me, it is all the same. But with a lot of players, the sentiments of war play a role. This applies to the whole Dutch nation.
When Marco van Basten controlled the ball and glided into the German penalty area, he heard the whistle and knew the referee had balanced the account. The German goalkeeper and the linesman discussed the matter, but they both understood.
As a professional, you actually don't expect anything, but you try to get it. You play to balance the score. You play simply to win a match. We were fortunate that the referee awarded us quite an easy penalty. This probably had to do with the fact that he also decided in favour of Germany. So I think he intended to balance it that way. But as a player, you have no influence. As a player, you can only do your best and give 100%.
With the seconds ticking down and extra time looming, Van Basten received a pass in his favoured position and slid home the winner. The Dutch had not conquered Germany in a full international for 32 years. Now they had, in a European Championship semi-final and on German soil. Yet Michels was determined that they should not and would not treat this victory as their finale. The USSR had defeated Italy in the other semi-final. The Dutch had lost to the Soviets in their opening match. Gullit, Rijkaard and the team still had a championship final to face.
I've known Ruud since my childhood. I've played a lot with him in the street. Played a lot of football in the street. It was very enjoyable in those days. We had a nice neighbourhood with a lot of good players. We were, in fact, the only two that made an international breakthrough. Yes, there was a lot of joy after the match. I personally was very happy as well. I was particularly happy because we had beaten Germany in Germany itself. And Germany has a reputation of being a very good competitor. So I thought it was a major achievement, and, as I indicated before, there were also a lot of players who were extremely happy because they thought, now we have finally had revenge for 1974. But okay, I think you should keep these things separately. Every match stands on its own. But there was an enormous amount of joy in the dressing room, yes.
De Russen worden altijd onderschat.
The Russians have always been underestimated on an international level. They are not entirely taken seriously. If there has ever been a competition in which the Russians showed excellent football from a defensive point of view, that it has been in 1988.
That the Dutch had managed to fail in all the other previous finals which they had contested was uppermost in the minds of most neutral observers, and uppermost in the minds of most Dutchmen, one suspects. On the 25th of July 1988, Holland met the USSR in front of 72,000 spectators in the Olympic Stadium Munich, and millions more tuned into television sets across Europe. The Soviets had defeated the Dutch 1-0 just 13 days earlier, and they started the final confident of continuing where they had left off. Michels' assessment of Soviet football appeared well-founded as the men from the East strive to wrestle the initiative from the Dutch. A sound and capable defence was backed up by a free-flowing forward line which moved the ball cleverly through the attacking channels, probing for an opening and never goal shy when an opportunity presented itself. Then, after 25 all-action minutes, Ruud Gullit began to take control for Holland, like a wild stallion leading his herd to safety. That Gullit was a master footballer would, on this evidence, never be in doubt. Late into the first half, a Dutch corner was purposefully nodded down by Gullit. As the Soviets streamed out, a cross was immediately returned into their penalty area, and Ruud Gullit dispatched a header the way other men dispatch a volley. Holland were now ahead. The Soviets resumed their attacking style in the second half. Internally, the USSR was starting to look westward. Soviet players were now harboring ambitions for a career outside their homeland. If the Dutch faithful believed a single Ruud Gullit goal would demoralize this Soviet team, they were very much mistaken. A European Championship final was the finest shop window any player wanting to attract attention to his skills could hope for. Then, in the 53rd minute of a pulsating match, Van Basten connected with a strike of supreme confidence, unparalleled technique, and breathtaking accuracy. The game was over for the Soviet Union. There was no way back from this level of expertise. The Dutch had at last proved to themselves and to the world at large that they could come into a final, absorb pressure, shake themselves free, and finish strong and victorious.
Je blijft natuurlijk elke topprestatie.
Well, of course, you experience every top achievement in your career as the best kind of experience. When you talk about these things, you are looking back. There is a difference between them. The 1988 reception in Amsterdam and in Eindhoven dominates one's memories when looking back on it. The reaction of the whole nation, not only the football fanatics, not only because we won the championship, but especially because of the defeat of Germany.
Relief and pleasure showed upon the faces of every Dutch player as he touched the Delaney Cup. Although a loser, every Russian player knew that he had done his reputation a power of good. The Dutch then unashamedly unraveled their flag and ran with it around the perimeter of the Munich Stadium.
One of the high spots, absolutely. I mean, winning something with the national team was a huge feast. We had a terrific reception afterwards when we came back to the Netherlands. Indeed, it has been one of the highlights of my career.
The Delaney Cup now had a 4-year resting place amongst the peoples of Holland. But in 1992, Lennart Johansson, the president of UEFA, the governing body of European football, was faced with a dilemma beyond his control.
This is something that I always will remember with sadness, because the Yugoslavian team has qualified already, and they were in Sweden, where the United Nations put a ban on them. And we have to obey to the decision being taken by the United. That is in our statutes. There was no other alternative but to ask them kindly to step out, which they did after some protest. They understood our situation, and today they even better understand what happened back then.
The torturous civil war raging in Yugoslavia meant that Denmark, runners-up in their qualifying group, were awarded a last-minute place in the finals at Yugoslavia's expense.
Jeg kan den aften, hvor vi fik den endelige besked, det var en...
The evening we were finally given the go-ahead was a lovely summer's evening. A journalist came to my home and said the word was out, that it had been decided to make it official, that we were to take part. The first thoughts I had were naturally that I was delighted that we were going to participate. It was a great challenge, and I was ready to meet it. On the other hand, I also felt a certain, should I say, pity for the Yugoslav players and my colleagues, because they were not the ones to go despite having qualified. My final thought was that I wished the war would stop. There were atrocities being committed there, and we could see on television that it had to come to an end. 1986 was the first time that a Danish national team took part in the World Championship final. The fact that we were going to Mexico, right over on the far side of the Atlantic Ocean, was a fantastic event here in Denmark, which attracted a lot of attention. Naturally, there were many young people, many children, who adopted the very professional players the Danish national team had at the time as their idols. There was a clear increase of players and of children who wanted to play football. So there is no doubt that that epoch was of great importance. The same thing happened again after 1992, when we won the European Championship. Again, there was a boom of boys, and girls too, who wanted to play football.
In 1992, England under coach Graham Taylor met France after an uninspired 0-0 draw against Denmark in their opening fixture. Gary Lineker led the English front line, while Michel Platini, a name synonymous with flair and creativity, was now the national coach for France. While Lineker was hoping to break English scoring records, Jean-Pierre Papin, the prolific French striker, was also hunting personal glories. Despite the forward talents on show, the game unfortunately was to centre around two defenders, Basil hit-and-run volley of France, who took a dislike to Stewart Upanatom Pearce of England. The English had entered the championship following a fine World Cup semi-final placing just 2 years earlier. But when they and the French both lost their next match 2-1 to Sweden and Denmark respectively, both took the early plane out of Sweden.
I think there are certain managers that fit the bill, so to speak, with regard to the media. And I think that Graham Taylor wasn't one of those. They only lost the one game, but he was vilified, through drawing to Denmark, who eventually won the tournament. Drawing against France, that's no disgrace. Yet it went down as a disastrous tournament for Graham Taylor, which is a little bit unfair. But I think that, he'll always be remembered, for taking England out of that competition, but probably even more so for the substitution of Gary Lineker. Graham Taylor has since on the record as saying that he did it only because he felt that Gary wasn't playing particularly well at the time, that the team needed a change. Now, what I would say is that, it's very difficult, to put myself into, Graham Taylor's position, but looking at it from the outside, I would look at it slightly different. Gary Lineker has always been a wonderful goal scorer. I think he was on 49 goals at the time. The fact that he needed one more, to get the record, wouldn't have come into my thinking. But the fact that Gary Lineker was a player capable of scoring a goal, I would never have substituted him. I would have kept him on the field, no matter how poorly he was playing, until the 90th minute.
10 dage, som jeg havde til forberedelserne, var jo selv sagt...
10 days, which is all I had for the preparations, is obviously far from ideal. But there were some good things about it. Perhaps one of these was that the Danish championship had not actually finished. The last match took place 4 days before we were to play the first championship match in Sweden. The matches running up towards the semi-finals in Sweden were of course very special. The first was a draw. We lost the next one to Sweden and then came up against an opponent as incredibly strong as France.
Det var jo vores semifinalekamp imod Holland. Den formede som
Our semi-final match against Holland developed into a drama. Hitchcock could not have directed anything better than that match.
Holland, European champions, were expected to sweep away the Danish challenge and go on to retain the title they secured in 1988. However, as early as the 5th minute, Brian Laudrup and Henrik Larsson had their own ideas. Like some great pillaging warrior, Larsson met Laudrup's shrewd cross, which left the Dutch goalkeeper pawing air and seized his moment. As though shaken from an idle catnap, the Dutch exploded into action, while Schmeichel, in the Danish goal, began an afternoon that would stay in the memory of all those countrymen who witnessed his performance.
Danmark, synes jeg, set med mine...
I think Denmark, seen through my not quite neutral red eyes, played their best in the first half. But we hardly took advantage of our goal opportunities when we should have. And in the second half, we were beginning to lose our strength.
Throughout the first 45 minutes, Laudrup continued to tease and torment the Dutch defence. Then against the run of play, the Dutch constructed a rare attacking movement that ended with a Bergkamp strike which should have deflated the Danish spirit once and for all. Bergkamp had been left unmarked close to the Danish goal line. A bad goal to concede. Schmeichel was furious. Yet instead of flooring the Danes, this Dutch equalising goal had quite the opposite effect, galvanising them forward with a ferocity that startled the experienced Dutch defence. Earned Henrik Larsson an honourable place in Valhalla. And sent the red and white sections of the terraces into uncharted areas of delight. In the second half, Frank Rijkaard strived to add pep to the Dutch attack. Then a Dane suffered the most grotesque of injuries.
In the semi-finals, an unfortunate thing happened for us when Henrik Andersen incurred a very nasty and serious injury to one of his knees. It was what I would call an unfortunate collision with a Dutch player. And the unfortunate thing was that he crushed his kneecap.
Danish hopes of reaching an historic championship final still remain high as their supporters whistled optimistically for full time. Then, with barely 5 minutes left on the clock, Holland were awarded a corner that fell at the feet of Frank Rijkaard, the consummate professional. Rijkaard had been at the very top for a long time now. He'd won almost every honour the game had to offer, and he could certainly recognise a scoring opportunity, however unlikely it may appear to others less instinctive. Two goals each, extra time. Then, with no further goals added to the scoreboard, the match moved into the drama of a penalty shootout. A Dutch score, a Danish reply. Then came Van Basten, and Schmeichel found a miracle. Marco Van Basten, the goal scorer supreme, had missed from the spot.
There was something quite special about the winning penalty kick. It was the way Ken Christoph took that last penalty kick. He was in the position, so he decided everything. Ken had frequently taken some very important penalties for his club team Brøndby, for whom he played at the time. He has always been very confident with them. I felt a calmness because it was him doing the kicking.
The Danes prepared. Win or lose, they had arrived in Sweden also round and had ended their stay as finalists against the reunited German nation.
Det er klart, at en sådan finale, som vi spillede mod Tyskland,
A final match, such as the one we played against Germany, will remain impressed upon my memory until the end of my life. For us, it was an enormously difficult match. The Germans had had a rest day more than us. We had suffered many injuries, and they could come to the game fresher and enjoyed a good period of preparation.
The game began in a rather robust fashion. It would finish the same way. Thankfully, the referee kept a tight rein over all the obvious flashpoints, yet quite wisely also allowed the football to flow. Then, in the 18th minute, a cross found John Jensen lurking behind the German line, and he let fly with a missile that exploded across the continent of Europe. The Danes had actually taken the lead against the Germans. Terrace support had become vital to Denmark's progress so far, and Schmeichel had no intention of allowing the volume to fade. Trailing by a single goal, the Germans swung into action as they had in times past, but found Schmeichel impassable. The whole Danish team appeared now to have acquired an aura of invincibility. They knew they would not be beaten, and more importantly, the Germans seemed to know as well. Brian Laudrup remained a fly in the ointment of German opposition. His close control gnawed at the German midfield, while his eye for the pass allowed his teammates the space in which to play. The Germans seemed aggravated by their lack of success, and even little Hassler received yellow from the referee. In the second half, the German attacks were broken up. The Danish players pushed tired limbs towards seizure, and the German players continued with their petulance. Perhaps it was because of Denmark's high-profile performances during the 1986 World Cup finals in Mexico that the old adage, "Out of tiny acorns, mighty oaks may grow," seemed appropriately coined here in Sweden on the 26th of July, 1992. In this furnace of excitement, a player was capable of turning from a mortal man into a giant with a single kick. In attack, defense. Across the whole spectrum of the game. Then it happened. A nod forward from midfield, a kind bounce, a suspicion of handball, an unsighted official. Denmark had secured a fantastic championship victory.
Men i sidste ende gik
Germany was an extremely difficult opponent for us, but in the end it worked out, and it was of course a great relief when Kim Vilfort scored goal number 2 in the second half. We knew then that we were in with a chance. We could bear the injury time before the referee's final whistle. The last precise whistle at the end is one of the things I remember best. Then it was all marvellous. We ran around the pitch and said thank you as well as we could to Danish supporters. Then there was the amazing fireworks in the middle of the pitch. For a giant football opening, let out brilliant fireworks into the sky. It was certainly an evening not many Danes will forget.
Perhaps because of the hideous carnage being perpetrated in war-torn Yugoslavia, it was appropriate that their joyful Danish replacement should be lifting the Delaney Cup. In 1996, England will proudly play host to the 10th European Championship finals. Football lovers from every corner of the world will converge upon some of the most picturesque and historic regions to be found within the ever-expanding European football family. In this mid-90s high-tech, internet surfing, satellite-communicated modern environment, it is worth considering why, when and how such a sophisticated project is nursed towards fruition.
First of all, UEFA is the one who is responsible for the regulations. They have clearly dictated and clarified the role of the local organizer. And we leave the responsibility for the local organizer to see to it that they are obeying to these regulations and rules. But UEFA keep watching what's going on, controlling and advising the local organizer.
We had to go through a competition with other interested parties, and UEFA, who own the event, insisted upon a certain number of assurances, a certain number of official documents stating that you had support of government, laying out the basic outline plan.
There were two equal partners almost, but as England had no big event since 1966 when they organized the World Cup, we gave preference to them, and as a result you could see we have decided that after England comes Holland, Belgium, a co-opted arrangement for the Euro next time.
Halfway through the bid process, all of the competing countries were asked to put in a supplementary bid should UEFA subsequently decide to go to 16. So we'd already made our plans in that direction. But we were given the tournament on the basis of 8 teams in May 1992.
When I came as president in 1990, we were 33 member countries. Now we are 50. And you must understand, with only 8 participants and the organizing directly qualified, it only left for 7 to qualify, and that takes 7 groups of 7 teams, and that makes 14 match days, and those international match days are not available. So it was a must to expand this tournament.
On April the 15th, 1989, 96 people died as a result of what became known as the Hillsborough tragedy. A terrible scar was left upon the flesh of English football, and Lord Justice Taylor ordered sweeping legislation.
Since the tragedy at Hillsborough and the Taylor report, there have been massive changes in English football, particularly in the way our grounds present themselves, the change to all-seated stadia, the dismantling of the perimeter fences, changes in the way the football dealt with itself commercially have brought in a lot of extra money into the game to enable these changes to take place. So really, we didn't have to set up an infrastructure. We had the grounds, we had the hotels, we had the transport system. In our country, where the disaster had actually taken place, through force of law, that process had already been gone through. And I think it's a great credit to professional football in our country, particularly to the clubs, that they dealt with what could have been a crippling blow in such a positive manner. I think we'll see when the European Championship comes round in June that the progress that has been made in English football has made our professional structure, the grounds on which we play professional football, pound for pound, ground for ground, the best in the world. The total number of tickets on sale is 1.35 million, 1,350,000. Of those, we've taken, I think it's 42,000, and made those into hospitality packages. That means either people are sitting in an executive box or they're in a luxury seat that is supported by banqueting facilities somewhere on the site of the ground. UEFA has two principal contracts for the tournament. They have a contract with ISL, who buy all of the commercial rights and then sell those on to official sponsors and suppliers, etc. And then they have a contract with EBU, which gives the exclusive television rights to the members of EBU in each of the countries throughout Europe.
Stephen Dixon, Managing Director, and John Christick, Manager of Sales and Marketing Football for ISL.
We're attempting to build awareness for Euro 96 and the official sponsors together in something we call the Sponsor Recognition Programme. We've put together a 1-minute commercial which will be aired in cinema and on television. We also have a print campaign to increase the linkage between the event and the official sponsors. That also promotes the event itself.
The moving image has become such an integral aspect of the today world, and probably the world of tomorrow, that it seems quite natural for football competitions and marketing concepts to comfortably coexist.
Well, one thing we tried to do is take a different approach. I think it would have been very easy for us to focus the camera on the pitch, come up with some great excitement, and again, brought to you by 11 or 12 companies. What we're trying to do is turn the camera around, do a complete 180, and focus it on the people who are in the terrace, the people who are there every day in, day out, living up to their game. At the same time, we've got a group of companies who we believe have made an equal or almost equal commitment, who are there, rain, shine, sleet, or snow, with their team, through glory and disaster, however you want to look at it. We've obviously worked very closely with the sponsors, working also with the Federation, UEFA, being sure that we are positioning the game in what has always looked as a very positive way. We've worked closely with the Football Association because it's very important when it's all said and done that we're all singing the same song.
One thing is for sure.
Because of the European Championship is not a European event, it's a global event, we're looking for multinational companies who can use the rights on a globalized basis. In the case of Euro 96, already we know that the television signal will be distributed to 194 territories, which is higher than ever before, and in fact is higher than the Olympics and the World Cup.
3 games in June of 1996.
A massive ticket sales drive was launched by the English Football Association, well in advance of the final draw ceremony, which was broadcast live throughout the nations of Europe.
From the International Convention Centre in Birmingham, the Football Association and UEFA, in association with the BBC and ITV, present the Euro 96 draw ceremony.
Please welcome on stage the President of UEFA, Lennart Johansson.
These are some of the triumphant men of yesteryear. Each were to leave a lasting impression upon the reputation and the future of the European Championship. The frontiers of Europe are widening. New countries appear alongside established nations. Any one of the 1996 competitors could win the cup.
I think Italy will be a difficult team to beat.
Je pense que la France, je suis français, je vais parler de la France.
Alan Giresse fancies France.
Nou, ik denk zelf dat Italië een van de favorieten is.
Johnny Rep, Italy and England.
Ich schätze, Favorit ist England.
Gerd Müller thinks England.
What's for Portugal and for Croatia, these are two teams. I think among those I mentioned you will find a winner. You must concentrate on the future, how to organize football today, and the format we are having we know fairly well, and it's functioning extremely well. But there is a tomorrow, there is a development. We only have to look back just 20 years ago what it looked like and what's the situation today, to tell ourselves that we must think until it hurts to find out ways and means to be attractive to the paying public even in the future, and to see to that football is keeping its role as the #1 sport in the world.
The Delaney Cup is a formidable prize to claim for any nation, and rightly so. Whoever the captain is, he strides the red carpet of Wembley's Royal Box. And whoever the team is, he leads forward. The spirit of Henri Delaney will follow them every step of the way.